Hi there, and welcome to the Plugged In Show. I am Paul Acey. We are doing something kind of special today. This is one of my favorite podcasts of the year because we get to talk about the Plugged In Movie Awards. For the last more than a month, we've been sort of rolling out what we think are the best movies in 4 different categories: best movies for kids, best movies for teens, adults, and best Christian movie. And today, we have no idea who's going to win at this very moment. That is what we are here to talk about. You do not. You do not. Don't spoil it for us. This is.
How can he, though? You haven't voted.
He's psychic.
He's very confident.
He's paid me off.
So
He paid for all my votes.
So today we are going to be talking about these movies, and we will be deciding right now who is going to win. Bob Hoos will not be able to let us know. So
I'll just twist your arm.
So let's go ahead, and obviously this is a little bit of a different show. We're not going to do a second segment. We're not going to do a game at the end, sadly enough. But we will.
Yeah, and I'm sure everyone at home is going, oh.
I'm telling you, the games,
Yeah.
people like them. I at least like them. So, but we are going to start off with an icebreaker, and it's going to be a little bit of a dangerous icebreaker because we are going to talk about what movies each of us wish would have landed on one of these lists, and why you wish that they would have been there, and why they didn't wind up there. So let's just start and go around the room. Brett, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So I will say Out of My Mind. This was a Disney Plus movie about a girl who had who has CP, who was nonverbal.
CP,
cerebral palsy, right? She's in a wheelchair. She's nonverbal, cannot speak, has to communicate through kind of a touchpad pointing toward pictures. It's a really sweet story about a family coming around her. It doesn't sugarcoat kind of the difficulties that having a child with CP provides, but it really leans into the love of the family, and you get to see her kind of find her voice, right? They're able to find technology where she's able to type things that then speak, and so she's able to communicate and start coming out of her shell a little bit. It's a really sweet movie. There are some issues as well that would probably prevent it from falling into our plugged-in movie awards. But
because it's really made for kids, right? This would have fit in our...
I think it would fit well in maybe the teens category, I would say. Some of the stuff, because the character is a teen, probably is a little more mature than would be for like young kids.
Yeah.
And some of the struggles that the family goes through as well. But I think overall, teens is probably where I would have put it. It didn't make the list this year, but it was a pretty sweet story.
Yeah, it was probably one of the bigger surprises for you in your early plugged-in career.
Yeah,
because it was
definitely.
one of the first movies that you reviewed.
Not one of the first, kind of in the middle, but yeah. But I was taken pleasantly by surprise.
Almost jerked that tear out of your eyeball.
Almost.
Not quite. All right, Kennedy.
Yeah, I've got actually 2
Oh.
for entirely different reasons. The first, Juror number 2. It kind of, in some ways, it kind of feels like the poor man's 12 Angry Men. And basically, the general plot is that there's a guy who's a juror, and as he starts hearing the court case, he starts thinking, I think I may have killed this person.
Which
and
is a
he has to
fascinating...
start to decide if he's going to reveal that or not.
Well, and you just gave it away for everybody who hasn't seen the film.
Well, no, it's something that's up in the air, and you don't really know.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't even really know. He thinks he hit a deer, but as he hears the case, he's like, maybe that wasn't a deer. But anyways, really interesting concept. And yeah, not too many horrible content issues. I think the worst is the language. But the other one, you'll know exactly why we can't have it on our list immediately. My Old A-Word. Surprisingly, and I wouldn't say it should be on the list.
And A-Word isn't the way.
That's a self-censor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would not.
This
make
is
our
not
list.
me saying it should be on the list in any way. This is me saying, of all the movies I saw, this one surprised me the most. Because, yes, it is filled to the brim with content. It's like, bunch of LGBT stuff, bunch of drugs, bunch of swearing, and a little bit of violence. And at the same time, though, some of the messages in it were just really heartfelt because the basic premise is that this girl somehow gets to start talking to her older self from like, I think like 15 years in the future. And in doing so, she works through some certain like traumas that not only her younger self is trying to work through because she's younger and hasn't experienced enough life to get through those. Yeah. But also she helps her older self like learn how to grow too. And it's in those moments it's really heartfelt, but it's just like such a content-filled movie that it's like we can't even like think about it for a moment. But I was so surprised. I was like, wow, this is actually really sweet in moments.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me a little bit. We saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah. And that feels like a little bit the same type of movie. That was an R-rated movie that had a lot of content. And yet it had some really powerful messages about family. You know, you look at the content and you think, man, if you could just take those good messages out, leave them on their own, it would be just perfect.
Yeah, they're only 5 minutes long.
There you go.
Those are good 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Solid 5 minutes.
All right, Em, what you got?
I think that I would definitely not put this on the list because it's just, again, content riddled, but I could understand why other people may want it on the list, and that would be Deadpool and Wolverine. Because as many problems as that film
been a
has,
dangerous ice.
I mean, like, that film has a ton of problems.
Yeah.
Like, we wrote an article all about how, like, you know, if your kid is really into, you know, Marvel and everything, how do you skip that movie without them being like, but Mom, you know? And I think the fact of the matter is the movie is entertaining. You know, it has that entertainment factor. It has, you know, it pokes fun at everything that's wrong with the Marvel universe, you know, because people are just angry about the direction that Marvel movies have taken. And so I could understand why people might be like, wait, why wasn't this on like the adult list category or something? And it's like, well, because, you know, as entertaining as it is, it does still have a lot of issues, you know?
Yeah. All right, I know what you're going to say.
Yes, you do. But I'm hesitant to say it because I don't want everybody to think we are truly fallen individuals who have no discernment in our media consumption whatsoever.
Go ahead and go for it.
All right. I was gonna...
To be fair, I had to review
Okay,
Deadpool 3,
yeah,
okay?
all right.
I wasn't going to the theater giving them my money.
My choice would not land on any list of ours, even the really bad movies that have a little bit of something good in it. I mean, we wouldn't even put that one. This one is Nosferatu. And I know people listening to that would say, oh, what? How would you say that? But
I'm saying that, what?
The fact is that, one, just from an aesthetics point of view, it was really well directed, really well shot. The lead actress, Johnny Depp's daughter, and what's her first name?
Lily Rose Depp.
Lily, yeah. She was excellent. But all that aside, the thing is that this is one of those horror movies that has, for me, when I was watching it, it just brought forth all these Christian thoughts. It spoke so clearly about the contrast between good and evil. I mean, stark between good and evil. And you couldn't walk away from that, in my opinion, without thinking a little bit about faith, about God, about where your position and your thoughts are in the world.
Yeah, and that really brings us to kind of what the challenges that we have sometimes even creating these lists, right? Because I reviewed Nosferatu. I totally see what you're seeing as far as it was one of the most spiritual films that I had seen this year. In a way, some of the Christian content that you see is strong. There's more of it than you would see in an occasional faith-based movie.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with horror. Sometimes they're much more open about faith.
But the thing is, you know, when you have those content issues, it is just, you know, when I think that's a perfect example of a movie that, man, it had some really great stuff, but there's no way we could ever put it on a list. We could never say, go see this movie because the content issues were just
in every
so
area,
extreme.
sexual, language, violence. It was terrible.
Yeah. I feel like I should go and just say Terrifier 3. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, along the same lines, I think probably my pick might be Sing Sing. You know, I reviewed that. That was a movie that was released earlier this year, earlier last year, March actually, about this time last year. Was about all these guys who were stuck in this high security prison, and they found sort of new sides of themselves through this theatrical program that they do. It stars Coleman Domingo, who was nominated for an Academy Award. It had some really strong messages about redemption and rehabilitation and moving past the sins and mistakes of your life. But man, so
And it
much
It was
swearing.
based on a true story, wasn't it? And a lot of the cast members were actually the guys who were in that prison and in that original theater production that they
Some
did.
of them still are. I
Yeah.
mean, it was one of the more creative films that I've seen. It was really interesting, but
So this is starting out. This plugged in show is starting out as all the films we don't want you to see, but we're thinking, had some merit.
we better get back on
That's
track.
right.
Let's go. So clearly, it's a difficult thing, and I think that most of the people listening probably feel that same tension when they're going to see movies themselves. We choose movies for a lot of different reasons. Is it a good movie? What kind of messages does it have? But it's also about guarding your heart, guarding your eyes, guarding your spirit, because that's super important when it comes to movie viewing too. So
Because not only do the good things stick with you, but the bad things too.
that's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. So let's dive into the most family-friendly content we have. Let's talk about best movies for kids. And Mr. Hoos, I'm going to ask you to read off the nominations in your best announcer voice.
Well, I left that one at home. Okay. The Garfield Movie, Inside Out 2, My Penguin Friend, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, and Woody Woodpecker Goes to Camp. How do we sort of close out with that? Woody Woodpecker. Yes, indeed.
So I will just say that I thought that this year the kids movie category was really, really strong. We had so many
packed.
movies. Yeah, and there were a lot of movies that we actually considered for kids, but we actually moved into other categories in part because it was so strong.
Right.
So, Brett, let's start off with you. What do you think was the strongest movie here?
Well, I enjoyed a lot of these. I had a lot of fun with Wallace and Gromit. It was great to return and hang out with those guys. But at the end of the day, give me Inside Out 2. I was really struck by just how well, it very much like the original Inside Out movie, very kind of deftly explores emotions, the emotions of a kid growing up in the different situations that she is dealing with, this character Riley, all the pressures, and how they stepped up to kind of the next level of emotions, right? You're familiar with like the core joy and anger and fear and all the rest. And then they kind of leveled up to the puberty emotions, the emotions that come with puberty, anxiety, embarrassment, envy, all the rest there too. And it was just very, very well done. Complex emotions.
Complex.
But again, they just delivered in such a powerful, emotional, and accessible way that I was
It
I was
leaves
very
Woody
struck by.
Woodpecker
It.
in the woods. It just,
Yeah, that's how I felt. Yep.
Yeah.
It is sort of interesting that we had Woody Woodpecker Goes to Camp and the Garfield movie that they were both a little bit of a surprise to me that they made the list. Why?
Yeah.
Let me go to you, Kennedy. Why did you like Woody Woodpecker?
Well, it's not going to get my vote. Well, preface it.
And yet,
Part of the reason it got my vote was merely because, well, Paul, you didn't really give me many good kids movies this year.
that was one of the ones you did. Eh?
but I did. I mean, I think there's a nice nostalgia factor to it. I mean, Woody Woodpecker has been around longer than any other character from any of the other kids movies.
But here's the interesting
Well,
thing.
hold on.
No. I've got to interrupt you because you made that statement. But the fact is that you're too young to remember the original Woody Woodpecker. And the reason I bring that up is because the movie doesn't capture the character of the original Woody Woodpecker at all.
Well, Bob, perhaps not. But
So
here's
there-
You just got age shamed.
Bob, here's the point, is that we want parents to be able to connect with their kids in various ways. And even if it's not the same character, and, you know, maybe he's matured or dematured
so parents
throughout
who
the
don't
years.
remember Woody Woodpecker, they'll connect. I got you. Okay.
Well, I think if you're sitting there and you're griping to your kid, man, this isn't the Woody Woodpecker I remember, then I think there's a bigger, deep-seated issue.
No, that's what I was feeling. I was also screaming out, "Get off my yard!" because there was a kid walking around.
But you know, parents are always looking for ways to connect with their kids, and being able to say like, "Hey, this is a character that I remember watching when I was your age,"
Yeah.
even if it's not the same one, if it's like a cousin or something. But that and I mean, the movie just didn't really have any issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting that you mentioned the nostalgia factor, and I think that's a really viable point. And you could make the same argument for Garfield, right? I mean, this
Yeah,
was a cartoon that you know, people my age grew up with, reading in the comics, sort of introducing them to maybe a younger audience. Is that part of the strength of that movie?
Absolutely. And having read the original comics so that I don't get age shamed here, I think it captures the original spirit of
Yeah.
Garfield. I think that it hit all the main points. You know, he hates Mondays. He loves food, particularly lasagna, you know.
He's orange.
And we get like a nice little backstory of like, but how did Garfield even come to be with John and Odie? And it's a sweet little story about family and parenthood. I specifically fatherhood. I could say say fatherhood. I think that it's just a nice little story to know that, you know, Garfield, he wasn't actually abandoned. He had a dad who loved him, and his dad did what was best for him, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's
So
sweet.
it gets your vote?
It's a tie between that and Inside Out 2, and so I'm going to hold my vote.
All right. Yeah, we'll go around. I wanted to just touch on My Penguin Friend, because of all
Yeah.
the movies that we
Yeah.
have on here, this may be the most unfamiliar. It's the only live action movie that
True,
we have
Which
on the
is
kids
pretty
list.
typical for kids.
It is pretty typical. We typically have a lot of animated movies.
yeah.
So this was sort of an outlier, and you really liked the movie when
It's-
you saw it, Mr.
The
Hoos.
thing is, it is a very simple story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a simple story that isn't going to get kids excited. It's not colorful like Inside Out 2. It's not funny and goofy. It's just a simple story about a little old fisherman kind of guy who rescues a penguin that sort of went astray and ended up on his little island. And he rescues this penguin, and then the penguin, for some reason, connects with this guy and his wife and comes back year after year
Which is
to
very
visit
sweet.
them. It's a sweet, simple story, and that's all it is. It's not a huge story. It's not one that probably will get any votes for our best movie of the year, but it is. But
I liked it a lot.
But it is one of
It's
those.
just nice. It's
Yeah.
one of those
Yeah,
stories that you
it
can
is.
watch with your kids when you're like, I cannot watch another cartoon. And
Right,
you're like,
right.
but what can I watch with my
there's-
kids that isn't going to be inappropriate?
There's no
and you're like,
content,
Yeah.
and kids who really like animals will really like this one.
Yeah. So I will just mention Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. I reviewed that. It was probably the funniest movie on this list, but it probably lacked some of the strong messages that we typically like
Yeah.
to see here.
At times, like if I was like 5 watching that Norbot would be
Oh,
terrifying.
the Norbot was scary, man. It was really, yeah. Caution to parents, Norbot is scary. It is true.
When he loses the pupils or whatever, just gets black eyes.
But
Really creepy. Even before he does that, it's really creepy.
but funny, man, it's funny.
Yeah,
it's a
Wallace and
really funny movie.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. I have a feeling I know who might win this, but let's go around the room and just say votes.
Okay, and I'll give you mine right off the bat. Since you were talking about Wallace and Gromit, that gets my vote.
Wow.
It was just
interesting.
a fun kids movie. I thought you can bring your kids to see this, or you can turn it on TV and no worries.
Emily, I know you're still up in the air, so I'm going to save you. Kennedy?
I'll say at the very least, I was very surprised by how good of a message was in Garfield, because I kind of expected it to be like the comic strip where it's like, okay, next. But with all that, with that kudos, I'm still gonna give it to Inside Out 2 because it was a very touching story.
So now you've got to throw. He's already given us. He's already told us. So
Inside Out 2.
now you've got to throw your
All right,
weight
so-
to whatever.
So I've got to ask you, did it make you cry Inside Out too?
It did a little bit. Just a little tear.
Let sadness out for just a moment.
Yep, exactly.
All right, do you want to
I'll
throw?
go with Inside Out too.
All right, I will also go with Inside Out too.
Too bad.
Sorry.
You guys are wrong, but that's okay.
Good job
You
keeping
say
it
that
non-unanimous, though.
That's right. I don't want to just be a
Sticking to your
joiner.
guns.
Yeah, I just think Inside Out 2, honestly, when I reviewed it, it came out earlier in the summer, and I thought, okay, this is going to be the best animated movie of the year. The animated movies this year were just so strong that it had some competition. But
Yeah, well, like you said, we even had to stick them in other categories.
well, but Inside Out 2 just it did also make me have a little tear just hanging out in the corner of my eye. So thanks. So for those of you who are looking for audience votes, you can find those tomorrow, which will be the 28th on our blog. You can find out exactly who you guys voted for as the best movie for kids.
and
of
see
the
how
year.
many votes Terrifier 3 got.
Well, I don't think that's really up in the kids.
Close. The next category over. Yeah, okay. Teens. The teen movies are Flow, The Long Game, Transformers 1, Ultraman Rising, and The Young Woman and the Sea.
This is going to be an interesting category. There were a lot of movies that sort of surprised me that
Well,
landed here.
I think we ought to start off just talking about Flow right off the bat. So we'll just jump around. But the reason we stuck this in teen, which was interesting because it's the kind of movie that you instantly, when you first look at it, you think it's just this beautiful, and I mean beautiful. This is
Gorgeous.
the kind of like every frame is like a piece of artwork, but it's this beautiful kids movie looking thing, but it really isn't. It's got so much more going on beneath no words. So
no
it's
words.
all visuals.
Totally a silent movie.
Well, you know
Yeah.
what they say, a picture.
Is
Worth 1,000 of them. Yep, indeed.
So there's a lot of words in this movie.
But it's really a beautiful film, and enough so that it's the kind of film that even teens, even though you might think of it as a kids movie, even teens will definitely appreciate this.
Yeah, it is one of the more unusual movies that I have seen actually in my plugged-in career, and it's really just about this cat who lives in this this flooded world. The world has experienced this huge flood. The cat, we never know whether it's actually a he or a she, swims to this boat, climbs in, and finds a capybara there, and so it becomes sort of this arc filled with all these unusual animals and how they get along. It's a fascinating movie.
Or don't.
Yeah. So, which brings me to, this is going to be an odd segue, but I really want to hear about The Young Woman in the Sea. Because, again, a watery movie, but this is...
There's the connection.
There's
There
the
you go.
connection.
My goodness. So, Young Woman in the Sea, starring Daisy Ridley. I liked this movie because, honestly, it's like the first movie I've seen in a while where I was genuinely just like so rooting for the main character. And I hadn't read up, it's based on a true story. I had not read up on the character beforehand. So I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know if she was going to actually succeed in crossing the English Channel or not, And so because of that, the whole movie, I'm just like, oh my goodness, is she going to make it? Is she going to make it? Is everything going to be okay? Like, you don't know what's going to happen. They don't set it up. Again, unless you had heard of Trudy Ederle is the woman's name, the young woman. So she, unless you've read up on her before, you wouldn't know going into this film, like, oh, this is how it's going to end necessarily. Very high stakes, very high reward, in my opinion. And there was just enough content to lean it into the teen category, but it wasn't like super egregious content where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna groan taking my teenager to this. More of like,
well, I think it's also just got a few more mature themes that are
Yeah.
just mature enough to put it out of kids category.
yeah, I don't think a kid would appreciate this. A teenager would watch this and be inspired, whereas a kid would just kind of be like, well, that's a movie mom and dad made me see.
I saw Young Woman in the Sea as well, and I liked it a lot as well. It really kind of falls into kind of that sports movie kind of mold, and you get your montages and your training, and she's like discovering her skill with swimming and improving and getting better and finally succeeding. But then she's dealing with all these other challenges along the way, ending up with the English Channel.
I was gonna say I feel like it didn't do too much montage either. Like
It
really
handled,
remember that.
It handled it
honestly.
well, but it definitely has that kind of sports movie sprinkle in there. But at the same time, it's very much kind of a period piece as well. It's early-ish 1900s, that she's doing this, and it's a pretty inspiring movie as well. So.
It's kind of nice to see a female lead in a sports movie too, right? I mean, I think that
and
can
in this particular one, they were like, you're not allowed to swim because you're a girl, and she's like, well, I'm gonna swim. So, and not in like a way that's like rude or, stepping outside her bounds or anything, just in a way of like, well, like honestly, the reason she and her sister learned how to swim and begin swimming is because there was a boat crash or some ship near their home, because they live near the pier and everything. A ship sank and every woman on board drowned because they were not allowed to learn how to swim.
Despite being so close to the shore.
Yeah, they could not swim like the 50 feet, or it was a really short distance, but they could not swim that distance to shore, so they all drowned. So their mom was like, no, my daughters are going to learn to swim. That is not going to happen to them, So you're in this world where girls are not allowed to learn how to swim, and so yeah. I think that adds to the inspirational part of it.
Yeah.
Even if you knew nothing about this film, it might have attracted attention, just people wondering why, if you've seen those publicity pictures of her standing there covered in grease. And you think, what? What's going on?
No, it's literally like porpoise fat.
Yeah.
Because when you swim the English Channel, that salt water is so harsh on your skin, you have to literally it's like an inch thick of fat all over your body, because otherwise your skin is going to get so dehydrated that you'll die before you get across.
Wow.
Because the water's so harsh.
So two of the movies on this list really surprised me that they landed on here, but they had a lot of passionate defenders as we were sort of talking about the list. And we're talking about Ultraman Rising and Transformers 1. I never thought
they feel like they're almost in the same category, don't they?
They do, and they are sort of.
Yeah.
But so tell me a little bit about Ultraman Rising, Kennedy.
Yeah, that was the surprise hit for me of this year. Every single year I'm like, what movie did I enjoy the most that I got assigned to? And that was definitely Ultraman Rising.
Wow.
If you don't know, Ultraman is a pretty famous superhero from Japan. He kind of looks like a Power Ranger, except he has this ability to essentially grow, kind of like Ant-Man, into like a massive dude.
This huge guy, Ultraman.
Yeah. And he uses that ability to fight kaiju, giant monsters who come and attack the city. And currently, it's kind of passed down in this family. And the guy who's using it now, Ken, he is kind of arrogant. He's a baseball player by day, superhero by night. But while he's fighting one of these kaiju, he eventually learns that this kaiju actually has... It's actually a mom, and it's got this egg, and the egg hatches, and the little baby kaiju, who's still like 10 feet tall, it imprints on him, and it's like, you're
so it's a
my
little like the
parent.
Wild Robot.
In a way.
Sort of.
And so it imprints on him, and he's got like this, essentially Jarvis AI, that's telling him, it's like, oh yeah, that's yours now, and So he's spending this whole movie trying to figure out, because he doesn't want to kill these creatures.
Right.
He knows that they're just living their lives like any other woodland creature, essentially.
Yeah.
So he's trying to raise it. And through trying to raise this creature, you see actually this really nice story about becoming a parent and having to deal with all that.
Wow.
And it's a little different, obviously, because it's not a human baby, but
A lot like
Mm-hmm.
The Wild Robot.
Yeah.
but like he struggles, and like there are times where he's like, why won't you eat anything I give you? And he goes to other people and asks them for advice. Like he goes to another parent. He goes to his dad, who he has a strained relationship with. He's like, I don't know how to do this. I need you to come help me.
Wow.
And it's really heartfelt.
Yeah.
And the only content issue is that they misuse God's name like 20 times, which is so disappointing because the rest of the movie is just so sweet.
Oh man, that's really interesting. Speaking of sort of larger than life stories that have this really human element to them,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you thought about Transformers 1, right?
Definitely. In fact, you mentioned being surprising to you. It was kind of surprising to me too, because I had only experienced. I didn't even really watch the cartoons way back when. I had only experienced the live action Transformer movies, which are generally just a lot of bing bam boom and nothing much more. Whereas this one, it's an animated movie, by the way, and it's based on those Hasbro Transformers, but it tells the early origin stories of Megatron and Optimus Prime when they were just, little robot guys working, with no powers, no nothing, and then they grow into who we know them to be, and it's a really nice story, one of those sort of buddy stories where the buddies at the end start heading in different directions, and
The better Mufasa movie.
yeah, I mean, it's fun, it's entertaining, and it's immersive, and I think it's one of those movies that kids can watch. Teens can watch, and parents can get in there and really enjoy. You don't sit there and go, "Oh man, what time is it? When's this thing gonna be over?"
Yeah.
It's a nice story, great characters, good voice acting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So The Longest Game is really sort of it's based on a true story about this golf team, this high school golf team. There's a lot of inspirational messages to it. I would probably wager that that's not going to get a lot of votes around the table. So let's move on, and I want to hear. I'm really conflicted at this very moment about who I might vote for. So tell me who you would be voting for.
Wow. Well, again, this one was a harder category because I really did like the Transformers movie. I liked it a lot, but I kind of loved Flo. And even though it's in a way an outlier, it's not one of those typical movies you put on the teens list. I think I'll vote for Flo.
Interesting. Em, what do you say?
I'm definitely voting for Young Woman in the Sea. I think that again, it was one of those movies where it's one of the few movies this last year that actually made me cry, and like good, happy tears. And so it just sat well with me all the way through. So that's my vote, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I can buy that.
I really liked Young Woman in the Sea. I really did. But you know how hard I pounded the table for Ultraman Rising. Because that just
To
really
get it on the list, yeah.
that just really
Yeah,
hit me. And I was like, oh man, this is nice.
yeah.
And so I gotta vote for that.
Well, I tell you what, you made a really compelling case. The Ultraman Rising sounds like a movie worth seeing, except for all those misuses.
Yeah.
But
That's the great thing about Flo. No misuse.
No misuses, no language at all.
Very safe. So I'm going to go Young Woman in the Sea as well for very similar reasons to what Emily described. It just sat well with me the whole way through.
Oh man, goodness
So
gracious!
now, are you just going to join in, or are you going to go with the winners?
This is a really tricky thing. So I reviewed Flo, and I loved Flo. I thought it was beautiful, and it probably, if I was going to make a list for like just the best movies I've seen, it might be 1 or 2 or 3 for me.
It's so well directed and constructed, and it's got some very nice messages too.
But I think when I'm looking for best movies for teens, Flow is just such a hard fit anywhere because it's such a strange movie.
Yeah.
And I loved your pitch for Young Woman in the Sea. And I think that is where, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is not where I thought this was going to go, but I'm going to go Young Woman in the Sea.
Yeah, that's the correct choice. I know who disagrees with me.
No, it was not a bad movie at all. It was a very nice movie.
So who's hero for 2? I'm
I
sorry.
know. I'm
I would
whiffing.
love to swim around the pier and get a free hot dog. That would be great.
Yeah.
I wish we could do that today.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, bring
Too bad
that
we
back.
live in Colorado. It's hard to find a pier here, but anyway.
Honestly, and when you've swam around a pier, like, yeah, you're
Doesn't that sound
hungry.
good?
That works up an appetite. I'd take it.
All right, Mr. Hoos.
On to adults. The adult category is Blitz, Dune Part 2, Exhibiting Forgiveness, Here, and The Wild Robot.
Oh my
Another
God.
category filled with some really
Yeah.
good films.
Really
in my
weird
opinion.
choices, Paul. Why'd we do these choices?
You know, the adults category this year was very strange, right?
Yeah, sometimes we have a hard time because of content in adult movies.
Yeah.
You know, and you think, ooh, I can't put that in a category.
Well, and I think that really comes down to it because some years we are given some really good movies that are made for adults that may have some content, but not enough where we can't put it on the list. When we looked at the good movies this year, man, so many of them just had too much content to consider. And so that left the adult category. I'll be honest, I think that this is one of the weaker categories that we
Really, I
had.
think these are very good films.
Well, it was just hard to. I think they're very different movies, and I think that's one of the benefits of this category is they all feel very, very different. So, and one of the ones that I was really surprised landed on this list here. So, Hoos, you actually reviewed
Yeah,
that movie.
yeah.
It didn't get great reviews from secular critics. Why did you like it so much?
Well, I think some people found it to be a little bit too.
Nostalgic.
No, not nostalgic. too. What's the word? Where it was so specialized, so unique that it didn't fit into their categories. Niche. There it is. Too niche. It's essentially a single camera shot film where the camera stays stationary, and then we see time pass in front of the camera, which is a very creative idea, and in a number of ways, that creativity works really well. There are some ways it doesn't, you know, where it just sort of flounders and you go, well, why are we seeing this? Why are they showing us this? It doesn't all fit. But there are some moments in this film, because there's one main family. We see actually several families, and we see different periods. It's even back in the days of the dinosaurs, you know, where a dinosaur stomps in front of this camera, as if there would be a camera back there. But anyway, the fact is that that creative lens of the world, we see the world passing by us, and we see all these things happening. This one central family, we see most of their story arc, and that's what brings us down to the conclusion of the movie, where some a very powerful statement is made that's incredibly emotional. I won't give it away, but after we've watched this story arc, it comes to this close that is really strong.
Yeah,
So, and that's one of the reasons that it's really good. But again, I think the tough part was that people just had a hard time buying into that single camera shot.
Sure,
the whole
sure.
time.
Kennedy, did you have a favorite amongst this list?
Yeah, I'd probably say Here.
Interesting.
I think with Here, it's interesting because I think it's one of those movies that you'd appreciate kind of the older you are, because you'll have experienced a lot more of what they've gone through.
And you're all in your 20s. But
yes,
that's
I am
beside
in
the
my
point.
20s. But
But he's got a lot to experience.
But at the same time, you know, when I watched that movie and my wife watched it with me, I was just thinking like, man, this is what it's going to be like. This is going to be so sweet, you know, and it made me just think about the future. And I was just so touched by it. And, you know, I'm not touched by seeing Tom Hanks CGI'd down to look young again. But the concept of the movie, yeah, maybe they were trying to pull that sentimental bone in you, very intentionally hard. But like, I'm just like, yeah, okay, but the comedies are trying to make me laugh, so it's the same kind of thing. So yeah, I'll accept it, and I really enjoyed it. And I think Bob's right. There are some, families in that movie that like don't really need to be there because they don't really add anything to the movie.
Just time to the movie.
It's like there's this couple that invents the lazy boy recliner,
lazy boy chair.
and it's like, all right, never see them again. But like in general, the general idea and message and themes of the movie, I was very happy with it.
Interesting. So no one's mentioned Dune Part 2 yet, which is a little bit surprising.
I don't think it's surprising.
I'll take it.
All right, you go for it.
Yeah. No, I'm a big sci-fi and fantasy fan, but even that aside, I think Dune Part 2 is probably the best movie that I watched last year. I would say.
Interesting.
Just beginning to end, it just captivated me. There are a lot of very complex issues, again, that are explored in Dune, the first and the second, but talking about the second. Content issues as well. One thing, though, I did appreciate about it, because there's, it's about the start of an intergalactic war in a lot of ways. So as you'd imagine, there's violence, there's different things like that, there's political intrigue. I appreciated that the movie did not go into like a gratuitous nature with some of the things that it could have, and I think
Especially if you've read the book, there are some things in there where you're like, oh,
right, right. But just this concept that Dune is built around about the danger of a messianic figure and what that can look like. Now, as Christians, we have the messianic figure in Christ, right? The true messianic figure. So I think it can be instructive to really look at Dune and be like, okay, well, what happens when people take a flawed human, and elevate them into the place of God in a lot of ways?
Yeah.
And I think approaching it from that way was very, very interesting, just in terms of seeing that play out. And, it definitely trends toward more of a downer ending than I would say most people might expect from kind of a big blockbuster but thoughtful action picture that almost kind of harkens back to, I think, Lord of the Rings.
Maybe.
The Harkonnens back to like a Lord of the Rings type movie that like fits in that
It's a
vein.
well-constructed film, too. The nice thing about this, I mean, if you've ever seen other films that have a part 1, part 2, sometimes when you get to part 2, you don't catch up very, very quickly. This one is structured so well that if you didn't see the first film, you'd be able to catch up with who the characters are pretty quickly.
Yeah. I would agree with you totally on that, Bob. And Brett, I think that you brought up a lot of really good points. One of the things that one of the greatest conversations we had this year, I actually sat down with Adam Holtz and we talked about Dune. It is more of a thinky type of blockbuster, where I think a lot of times when we look at these lists, we have these clear-cut messages. We have these this will make you want to be a better person. Dune Part 2 is not really that, but it is a great movie to take your friends to have a cup of coffee afterwards, to talk through some of these themes, because it is a big thematic movie just in terms of what it tries to deal with. And yeah, the action sequences are amazing. They are just amazing.
So I didn't dislike Dune. Like, I went and saw it, and I enjoyed it for its entertainment value. And I've read the book, and maybe that's my problem, is that I think the reason I'm like not pounding the table for Dune Part 2 is because I think in my head it blends. The book, the first movie, and now the second movie are all blending together into one, and so it's just not. It doesn't stand out to me. Like, I don't actually remember it.
Yeah.
That's what maybe that's what's happening, is that I don't remember what happened in Dune Part 2, and I think it's because it's all blending together into one for me.
Well, I think a lot of people experienced Harry Potter that way. They read the books first, and then the movies sort of blended in.
That didn't happen to me.
No, really?
Not at all. But I will say, those Harry Potter movies were not as well made as they could have been, because I do think that if you didn't read the book, you are kind of confused, because I remember explaining a lot of the plots to my dad as we were watching them together as a family. He'd be like, so what's happening here? And I had to explain it to him, you know?
And I think that's the main reason why I am picking here over Dune, is because I think just by itself, Dune is a very good movie for entertainment's sake and for some of the messages. But I am just so not in favor of, I guess, Frank Herbert's kind of ideas behind the books.
Sure, I get that.
And
Yeah.
to extension, the movie, because the director is doing such a good job of bringing the books to the screen.
Yeah.
But the overall message of essentially power corrupts everybody and you can't trust anyone, and eventually everyone good will become bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that
It's a difficult
I'm
message.
not-
Yeah, I totally get
as much as I enjoyed the movie for movie's sake, I don't enjoy that message.
Yeah, I get that. I wanted to talk a little bit about some movies that we probably won't talk too much about in the voting process. Blitz, which is a World War II movie. You can find it on Apple TV Plus. They do some great stuff. Saoirse Ronan is stars in it, and she plays this mom whose son, during the Blitz, when the Germans are bombing London, he is being sent off to the countryside. He escapes the train and makes his way back. It's a really powerful mother and son movie.
It is, and it's also a period piece. If people enjoy period pieces, this one paints that like late 1930s, early 40s period so well.
It does.
And there are powerful moments in this too. By the way, Saoirse Ronan is probably the best actress we have working in film right now.
Wow, that is quite
She's
the
really
statement.
good. Now, I'm not saying this film is her best work.
Yeah.
But I think she's wonderful.
Yeah. The other film that I'm just going to mention really quickly is Exhibiting Forgiveness. This is an R-rated movie for language. And like Dune Part 2, I think the messages here are complex. This doesn't leave you necessarily with a great feeling, but it deals very explicitly with the idea of faith and forgiveness and can people change. It's really about this artist who has a very difficult relationship with his father. His father was abusive as he was growing up, hasn't talked with him for 15 years, but circumstances push them together. And all of a sudden, the dad he feels like he has changed. He's stopped drinking. He's stopped using drugs. He is carrying a Bible wherever he goes. And so the relationship and building that relationship back up is sort of the point of exhibiting forgiveness. And it's one of the most powerful movies that I saw last year, but it does have a lot of content. And of course, then we've got The Wild Robot. The Wild Robot. This was one of my favorite movies of the year, but does someone else want to talk about it?
I thought it was great, and honestly, like I'll go ahead and cast my vote for it. I know so we moved it out of the kid category into the adult category because there were some really strong messages about motherhood. Because Roz, this robot, she really learns. She was not programmed to be a mother, but in caring for this little gosling, she realizes that she's going to have to give up everything. She's going to have to sacrifice she's going to have to sacrifice emotionally, physically, just like all the things of motherhood in order to keep this little gosling alive long enough that he can, fly the coop and go on his own. And I think it's really touching because I think that there's a lot of moms out there who will absolutely say that, having a child was like the best thing they ever did, but also they will also say it's also the hardest thing I've ever had to do because
and they might say I wasn't programmed for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it is an emotional drain, it is a spiritual drain, it is a physical drain, and it's worth it.
Yeah,
That's
beautiful.
And the film does such a great job of conveying everything that she was just talking about. And as a dad watching it, it was still incredibly moving.
Yeah.
And again, it's an animated movie about a robot and a little duck, you know. But still, there was something about it. Now, I went to see it actually with my son. My son and I went to see it, and he's an adult but not a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he got as much out of it
Right.
as I did. I mean, I walked out of it going, "That was so great." He was saying, "Yeah, it was okay." You know.
Was it a duck or a goose? Now I can't remember.
It's a goose, yeah.
It is a goose. Okay,
Sure.
I couldn't remember.
It's a small bird thing.
You know, the other thing I really liked about it, I loved the art style.
It was
It's not your
beautiful.
typical cartoon. It was very artistic. It looks painted in some areas, and I love that. So, you know, as an adult, I feel like that art style, you can appreciate it more. Like, it's not your typical cartoon.
Yeah, the Wild Robot and Flo, man,
Yeah.
they were in
Yeah.
a category of
It
their
is.
own.
It is a 1-2 punch in terms
yeah,
of
wow.
artistry. There's this one scene in the Wild Robot where Roz the robot touches this tree, and the butterflies just sort of fly away. It's just so
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Really
It
beautiful.
is just beautiful. So with that in mind, I think your point as far as your son is one of the reasons why we chose the Wild Robot in the adult category,
Yeah.
because it really does feel like it's made for moms more than kids in a lot of ways, made for parents just to have that feeling.
Yeah, no
So,
question.
and I do think I will just start off the voting. It gets my vote.
Oh,
I already started the voting. I said
Oh, yeah,
I was
that's
gonna
true.
cast my vote for that one too.
I'll say Dune.
Oh, okay.
You know I'm voting for here.
Yep, there we go. Oh my goodness.
yeah. It's not like I'm a tiebreaker, but I could actually create a tie if I voted for one of these other two. But I'm going to go with the Wild Robot too. I thought it was a really lovely film.
Yeah. All right. So the Wild Robot wins. Okay. On to the Christian category. We will
Christian.
try to cruise through this a little bit quicker.
Okay.
The show's been going on for a while.
So you can come back tomorrow and find out what we think. Okay, here we go. Best Christian movies. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, Cabrini, The Forge, Ordinary Angels, and Unsung Hero are our films.
Boy, I tell you what, this was one of the best Christian categories we've had. And it seems like we say that every year, but
Well,
I
you
think
know-
Christian movies are getting better.
I wouldn't have known anything about that because you kept all the Christian movies to yourself.
So that's why you thought it was great.
I
He wrote
did
them all.
I did review a lot of these, but one of the movies that I think got a lot of attention at the box office was Unsung Hero.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Unsung Hero.
You know, here, I'll start out by saying I'm not a fan of Christian movies. Now I know that's like what?
You're out of here now.
Okay, see you. No, I've never been a real fan of Christian movies, and a lot of times it has been because they're just not good. I mean, and you know, where they're poorly written, or they're poorly directed, or they're poorly acted, and where they've just got flaws. And I'm a person who loves good film, and I look at Christian films, and a lot of times I'm just not finding good films. But you're right. So some of these on this list are really excellent, and Unsung Hero is fabulous. It really is. When I watched it, I was actually totally surprised at how good this film is. A lot of people would recognize it as the Rebecca St. James story. Mm-hmm. It's actually about her family, the Smallbone family, who come over from Australia. Their dad sort of loses everything in his business. He's in the music industry. And they come over, and everything that he thought was going to happen when they get here all fell through. And so they were just almost stranded with nothing in the United States, in a place that they didn't know, and in Nashville. And it goes ahead and tells their story, but it is paced so well. The story is written so well, and the acting. Daisy Betts plays the mom of the family, and it's really her story, and she is incredible. I mean, really. And I say that because I didn't expect it. It's not that I hadn't heard of this actress before, and I didn't expect the story to be so good and such a great story of faith. When you're lost, you're abandoned, you've got nothing. the only thing you've got is the ability to rely on God's grace. Telling that kind of a story can feel forced sometimes. It never feels forced with this film.
That's
It's
interesting.
really a well-made film.
That's interesting. Yeah, there were some really strong movies here. I think one of my favorite that also did really well at the box office was The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. And I'm a little bit biased because I loved the book. I sort of grew up with the book. Barbara Robinson wrote it, I think, in the 60s. And so it's really become sort of a part of our Christmas tradition. The movie translates that book really well on screen, and it is funny. And I think it is really hard for Christian movies to be funny. This one is legitimately laugh out loud at times, and I think that makes it work. And it has such a resonant story too of the idea, it's about this family, the horrible Herdmans. They're these crazy kids who can do nothing right, who sort of invade this Christmas pageant in this small town. They think that they're going to get candy and free food, and so they just decide that they're going to start going to church, and then they decide that they want to do the Christmas pageant, take over all the main characters. So it's a crazy story of chaos, but it illustrates to me, I think, the power of the real Christmas story, how it changes lives, and how it's meant for people a lot like the horrible Herdmans, a lot like us, who are flawed, who are failing, who just have a hard time.
We are the horrible Herdmans.
We are the horrible Herdmans. That's right.
So to me, it seems like, so the horrible Herdmans, they come into this church, they take over the pageant. I can see a lot of churches potentially not responding well to that, being like if that happened to them, being like, wow, you just took over our Christmas pageant and you are horrible. Like, why are we allowing them to do this? And to me, it doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the mom kind of step in and say, no, this is exactly the sort of people we need to be letting in. These are the broken and lost people that we need to be welcoming in and letting them be a part of all of this.
It becomes that because you do have this resistance, and I think you're absolutely right. Like a lot of churches, I mean, people sometimes go to church to feel comfortable, to associate with people who are like them. And the Herdmans are not that way. The mom is very strong in defending the Herdmans' right to be there. At the same time, she's scared to death that she's going to fail because she's running this. It's her first time running it, all those very human pressures to succeed. But then as the story goes on, and especially at the climax, where the actual pageant happens, you see the beauty and how much more real the story is because of it. So.
And you're absolutely right. Humor is tough.
Humor is tough.
To write and to perform humor, tough, especially in a Christian setting because it usually tends to go cheesy. But this one's really funny.
Yeah, it really worked well. Another movie that I thought was pretty interesting was Ordinary Angels. And the reason why I found it interesting is it stars a 2-time Oscar winner in Hilary Swank. It also features the guy who plays Reacher on Amazon Prime, who I just reviewed Reacher. And yeah, it's a little bit different to see him in a Christian movie.
You don't expect this Hulk of a man. Yes, indeed.
Well, hey, that's how I kind of felt with Terry O'Quinn and Unsung Hero. I was like, oh, John Locke. Look at that.
There is that, right? It's kind of strange to see these people in environments that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Right. But I think that Ordinary Angels, it really just does suggest sort of that growth of the film industry, right? Where you're getting some really strong actresses who are a part of these stories. Tell me a little bit about Cabrini. What did we think about Cabrini?
That's me. So Cabrini, it's not going to get my vote on this particular voting, but
let's stop there.
Hold on. Let me explain. The reason I do think that this film has a lot of merit. It's about so Mother Cabrini. This is based on a true story. It's the first female American saint in the Catholic denomination, and basically her whole story is that her whole life she's been told that she cannot do things because she's a woman, because she's Italian, because she has a weak constitution. She almost drowned as a child and has just been very sickly ever since. But, despite all the doctors, saying this is what's going to happen, she has somehow prevailed and outlived their expectations, and she attributes it to the Lord. And so she feels this calling to go to America and start, I can't remember exactly what she calls it, but it's like a network of hope. Basically, she wants to set up orphanages and schools and hospitals for the poor, and she wants them worldwide. And so she finally convinces the Pope to send her there. It's the first female-led mission. And they're like, if you fail, they're never going to let women go on missions again. Like, you have to succeed, but we can't really give you too much help because it is all led by by a bunch of Italian nuns, essentially, right? And sure enough, when they get there, they face all kinds of like racism and sexism. Like, they cannot catch a break. And in the meanwhile, she is watching children literally die in the streets because they just have nothing.
Yeah.
And she's especially, feeling for the female children because a lot of them grow up to become prostitutes because that's all they can do to survive. And so there's a very touching story where she actually helps one such young woman who has been forced into that life and kind of helps her to get out of that life. And she does build up her orphanage, and she doesn't do things by the book, but she doesn't and so she steps on a lot of toes trying to get the funding she needs to set up these orphanages and these hospitals and stuff. And she is just, every step she takes, she's getting resistance from, the mayor of New York. She's getting resistance from the archbishop of that area. And, she's doing her best, but she just keeps saying, you're not going to tell me no where God has already told me yes.
Wow, that's really interesting.
A lot of your films seem to have that women overcome overcoming misconceptions.
I promise that is not intentional. It just so happens that those are the movies you gave me this year, and they were good.
Totally
I think
get it.
So. Yeah, Cabrini, I think, is a very good story. I don't necessarily think it will resonate with everybody. Which is actually why it's not necessarily going to get my vote.
Yeah, I can understand that. So let's talk a little bit about The Forge really quickly. When we talk about sort of the growth of the Christian film industry, I think the Kendrick brothers have been really instrumental
They've had a big hand in it,
in sort of creating that environment where Christian movies can thrive. And, and The Forge might be, I think, the best Kendrick brothers movie that I've seen. And it's really talking a lot about discipleship. Now, the Kendricks make movies for Christians. These are movies that you're not going to have a lot of secular folks who come in and they're going to say this is great, because it really the messages are made for Christians. But this one really talks about just how important the art and discipline of discipleship is to grow young men into young men. It's really about creating, it's a little bit of Christian form of adulting. What does it mean to be a godly man, and how do you get there? And that's what this movie is about. Like you, Emily, I don't think The Forge is going to get my vote. I would cast mine just because I always loved the book and I liked the movie a lot. It is the best Christmas pageant ever. So, Brett, what would you say?
I think there's a lot of good options. I think I will also go best Christmas pageant ever. Yep.
Well, I have to go with Unsung Hero. And the reason is there are so many parts of that movie that really resonated. In particular, I loved how it explored the dad's just difficulty in dealing with these emotions and seeing, like, you can feel the shame that he's feeling and being like, I'm trying to provide for my family and I can't. And you know, and yes, there are miracles that are happening where other people are coming by and they're giving us everything that we need, but it's still really hard for him because he wants to be the one who provides that.
Yeah, in a way, he's
And-
struggling with faith.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that he's not a man of faith, but he, like you said, he desperately wants to be able to do it on his own, you know, whereas the rest of the family is just relying on God's grace.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the reason why I liked it so deeply is because it goes one step farther. Whereas a lot of Christian movies that I've grown up with, at least, are just kind of like, you know, there's a part in the movie where they're like, oh, we'd like these things for Christmas. And then their local community and church kind of brings them everything that they had on their list, including like a washer and dryer and all this stuff. And in that moment, it was like, oh yeah, this is where the 2000s Christian movie ends. And they're like, oh wow, that's so great, you know. And to an extent, it's great because it made me really think of, you know, the Bible verses are like, and they had all things in common. And you really see that in the film. But then it takes it a step further, and it's like, but we still have to deal with the fact that, you know, the dad still really wants to provide for his family.
Yeah.
And he's feeling like, despite them getting everything they need and having everything in common, he still feels like a failure.
Yeah.
Because he can't provide those things.
That's a very human reaction. Yeah.
And so because of that step further, I really liked it.
Yeah.
I agree. And in fact, I'm going to hopscotch Emily so she can be
That's
the
fine.
deciding vote, because I'm going to go for Unsung Hero as well. And another thing that I was going to throw in there was also just tagging on to what you were saying about the Kendrick brothers. I don't think Unsung Hero is necessarily made for Christians. I mean, it might have gotten a lot of audience members coming in saying, I want to see the Rebecca St. James story. But it's really a story about this family and about their struggles and about their faith. But it's not heavy-handed in any of those areas. It's a really well-made, nice story that your family could watch, even if you know nothing about the Christian music industry.
Interesting.
Can't believe you guys made me a tiebreaker. See, because like right now, it's like, so if it's kind of funny because no matter what I vote, that means that every movie I voted for actually won.
Wins. That's right.
But like, I'm looking at Hoos and I feel like I'm gonna get your chagrin if I don't.
That's right, because you voted against me every time.
Oh man. Oh,
It's a tough call,
it
right?
is a tough call.
I will say the main thing that kept me from Best Christmas Pageant Ever, and as a little worm tongue behind Emily, I think my only problem with Best Christmas Pageant Ever is that it's a Christmas movie in a sense, and so it's one of, like, I can watch Unsung Hero whenever I want.
Yeah.
But it's going to be one of those movies for me where I'm like, I can't really watch this until it's around Christmas time. And so that was one of the things I had with the Best Christmas Pageant Ever.
That's a compelling argument. Yeah, I'm gonna give it to Unsung Hero.
Oh man, I tell you
Victory
what.
at last.
You know, you can celebrate Christmas all year round.
That's right. This is alive in your hearts.
Don't make that argument now.
The
Come on,
problem
man.
It's too
is
late.
that the vote has already been cast, and
That's
you can't
right.
take it
That's
back.
right.
Oh man, this has been a fun conversation. And the winners are Inside Out 2, Best Movie for Kids, Young Woman and the Sea, Best Movie for Teens, The Wild Robot, Best Movie for Adults, and Unsung Hero, Best Christian Movie. Turn to our blog if you want to know how you guys voted. We'll be tabulating all of those, and we will have them for you on the blog tomorrow. This has been such a fun conversation, and I enjoy this conversation every single year. This is always a lot of fun. The votes may have been tallied, but that doesn't mean the conversation needs to stop. Let us know what you think about our selections. Let us know what you would have selected. Tell us on Instagram, on Facebook. You can leave a voicemail.
But Terrifier 3 is flat out.
Terrifier 3 is flat out. There was a write-in for Terrifier 3. We will find you, whoever you are.
And shake our fingers.
Shake our fingers.
And that'll be the plot of Terrifier 4.
So chime in on social media. Write us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com. Let us know on the Plugged In Show homepage, or just let us know on the blog. And be sure to join us next time on the Plugged In Show.